Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukam Karoti Vacham Pangum Nangyate Girim Yat Kripatamaham Vande Shri Gurudena Taranam Paramanandam Madhavam. Hare Krishnas. So we were in the concluding part of the 12th chapter, 5th canto. This is the conversation between Maharaj Rahugana and Jad Bharat. So we see the instructions given by Jad Bharat about the nature of the material world, the qualities of the Lord, the qualities of his abode, the nature of Bhakti. And in the last 3 verses, Jad Bharat will reveal his history. And this is essentially to establish credibility in everything that he is saying. So we will resume from verse 14. Sai Prabhu, if you can read the translations. Aham pura bharatunam raja vimukta drashta shuta sangha bandha aradhanam bhagavati hamano mrigo bhavam mriga sangat dhatartha.
In a previous birth, I was known as Maharaj Bharata. I attained perfection by becoming completely detached from material activities through direct experience. And through indirect experience, I received understanding from the Vedas. I was fully engaged in the service of the Lord, but due to my misfortune, I became very affectionate to a small deer, so much so that I neglected my spiritual duties. Due to my deep affection for the deer, in my next life, I had to accept the body of deer.
So Vishnu Chakravarti says that after hearing all these elevated instructions from Jad Bharat, who is moving around like a madman, the king might ask, then who are you that is so mercifully giving instructions on such exalted transcendental topics to a great offender like me? So this verse answers that implicit question. So it should be also noted that the king had already surrendered to Jad Bharat. So Jad Bharat is not using this to inspire the king to surrender, because the king has surrendered based on the speech of Jad Bharat. When he heard Jad Bharat speak such exalted words, he had immediately fallen down from the palanquin to the feet of Jad Bharat and surrendered. So, despite the fact that Jad Bharat did not have any noticeable symptoms of a Mahapurush, so he was doing the job of a Shudra. He was acting like a Muda. He did not have any followers, and he had not introduced himself. Now he's introducing, but at that time he had not introduced himself. But simply on the words of Jad Bharat, the king had surrendered. And that actually made him a suitable recipient of the knowledge. So Vishnu Chakravarti says the implicit question he's saying is, the king is saying that I am a great offender. So the king had offended Jad Bharat in various ways. He had offended him by forcing him to carry his palanquin. He had offended by repeatedly chastising him. And then to a lesser extent, he had offended by the constant challenge that he gave. That was to a lesser extent because that is acceptable. The disciple should ask the guru for clarification, but the king in his mind is still considering that to be some kind of an offense. So he's saying that I was repeatedly offensive to you. And Chakravarti Pad says that his real qualification was that he understood the greatness of the person simply by talking. Srila Prabhupada said that a fool is not noticed until he opens his mouth. So the converse is also true, that a learned person is really noticed when he opens his mouth. So Jat Bharat had already given mercy to the king. Now, in order to install even more faith as an act of mercy, Jat Bharat reveals his a very exalted past. And in doing so, he is also sharing the lessons that he has learned. So he talks about how he had achieved perfection. And so this was, even though it's the previous life, it just was life before the previous one, where through direct experience. So when devotees are practicing, then their experience is indirect, which means that they are experiencing spirituality through the eyes of the scripture. And when they become more advanced, then it becomes pratyaksha. Then they actually begin to directly experience. So he says that the king's Jat Bharat says that both through direct and indirect experience, which means that by the mercy of the gurus who had imparted the knowledge of the scriptures, by his own commitment to the practice, he was fully engaged in the service of the Lord. But then, because of attraction to a deer, he fell down. Srila Prabhupada talks about the importance of devotee association, specifically the shelter of the Guru. So he says that if one always follows the orders of the spiritual master, there is no question of falling down. He talks about Yasa Prasada, Bhagavad Prasada. Then he said, despite a very rigid life in devotional service, Bharat Maharaj did not consult the spiritual master when he became overly attached to a deer. Right? So when we were discussing the so-called fall down of Maharaj, then there were different aspects for consideration. One was that he still had buried in his heart this subtle contamination that he's the protector, which came from the fact that he ruled for a very, very long time and was adored by his praja. They looked upon him for guidance and protection. So even though he was at the Bhava stage, he had given up all the external manifestations, but they were still in a seed form, somewhere this conception that I am the protector, which got once again manifested when the deer came to him for protection. The other factor was that he had no association. And Prabhupada says specifically that of a Guru Maharaj, which is always there to correct. So that is why, even though when he was deviating from the path, he did not have a shelter. So in terms of the importance of the association of the Guru, we see that it's important in both ways. It's important from the perspective of what not to do and also what to do. So in the case of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he was experiencing, so when he was given the Maha Mantra by Ishvapuri, his initiating spiritual master, then he started experiencing unlimited ecstasy. So what does he do? He goes back to Ishwarapuri and says, what's happening to me? He did not go into this mood that, of course, he's the Lord, but playing the part of a disciple, he didn't go into the mood saying that, okay, now I've transcended my Guru Maharaj and experienced the ecstasy. But in the mood of a disciple, he goes back to the Guru Maharaj and he says that, what is this happening to me? And of course, Ishwarapuri says, this is the gift of the Mahamantra. He assures him that this is the right thing. We also see in the first canto, when Vyasadeva was feeling despondent, he immediately consults with Narad Muni. Right? So that's the importance of having an ongoing shelter. Okay, let's move on to verse 15. Samam smritrir mrigadeha pivira Krishna chan prabhavanu jahati Atho aham jana sangata sango Vishankamano vibratas charami.
My dear heroic king, due to my past sincere service to the Lord, I could remember everything of my past life, even while in the body of a deer. Because I am aware of the fall down of my past life, I always keep myself separate from the association of ordinary men. Being afraid of their bad materialistic association, I wander alone unnoticed by others.
So Jat Bharat is continuing with the description of his past life. So he talks about his own mistakes and he talks about the complementing mercy that is saving him. Right? So we see this mood of a devotee. He's not complaining that even though I did so much service, just for a little deviation, the Lord made me a deer. He could have done something else. He could have overlooked it. But quite the opposite. He's actually grateful. And he's giving this as an example of the unlimited mercy of the life of the Lord. So he said that I became a Jati Smarana as a result of the potency of the bhakti that I had already performed. Right? So he's preaching also through his personal experience that this is the potency of bhakti, that even if the performer deviates, the process saves. So he also talks about the lessons that he learned. He says that because I am aware of the fall down in my past life, I always keep myself separate from the association of ordinary men. But so now he's talking about his current state of mind. That now the association, the bad association that he had was of two kinds. One was the bad association with his own anarthas. And the second was a bad association with the deer. So one of the characteristics of a sincere devotee is having a very healthy fear of material association. Right? In Krishna's pastime, the Acharyas note that Kamsa represents material association and Devaki represents the Jiva. So because of the strong fear that Devaki had with Kamsa, she was freed of the 6 material contaminations. So the 6 sons of Devaki, the Shadgarbhas, they are killed by Kamsa. So the fear of material association can be used to purify oneself of material contamination. And then what happened? Then Lord Balaram appeared. Then the Guru appears. It said then the heart of Devaki was purified of the contamination. Then the Guru appeared. And what happens after the Guru appears? Then Krishna appears. So it started because of a healthy fear of material association. Started because of the presence of Kamsa in the life of Devaki. So Chhat Bharat is also preaching this point to the king, that at all points of time, you should cultivate a very healthy fear of material association. So you should be always scared. In the purport, Prabhupada talks about 240 Swalpama, so this is Neha Bikram Nashasti Pratvaya Vatyate Swalpam Apiyasya Dharmasya. That even a little advancement in the path of devotion can save one from the most dangerous fall down. The Prabhupada quotes this because the pastime of Bharat Maharaj goes against this promise. So essentially what the verse says is that even if you practice a little bit of bhakti, then you are assured a human form of life in your next birth. Swalpam apiyasya dharmasya. Little bit, swalpam. Right? Now, Bharat Maharaj was by no means swalpam. Right? He had practiced extensively devotional service. And then Prabhupada quotes another verse, Yam Yam Vapi Smaran Bhavam Tajati Antakalayavam, that he thought of the deer at the time of death, so he became a deer. So the point Prabhupada makes that the verse 240 also stands, because even though he became a deer, but that form of the deer was not an ordinary form of deer. So as a deer, he remembered his past life. As a deer, he immediately went to the ashrams and began to associate with the sadhus over there. As a deer, he was completely aloof from other deer. So what more protection can one get? So having a body of deer and developing this conception is much more advanced than having a body of a human and seeking bad association. So Prabhupada said, the service to the Lord never goes in vain. Okay. So we now move on to the last verse of the chapter. Tasman naro sangha susanga jata jnana saneva vibhukana moha harim tadeha kathan shrutabhyam labdhasmriti ryatyati paramatvana.
Simply by associating with exalted devotees, anyone can attain perfection of knowledge, and with the sword of knowledge can cut to pieces the illusory association within this material world. Through the association of devotees, one can engage in the service of the Lord by hearing and chanting Sarvanam Kirtanam. Thus, one can revive this dormant Krishna consciousness and, sticking to the cultivation of Krishna consciousness, return home, back to Godhead, even in this life.
So Srila Prabhupada, in the translation, he also commingles a little bit of purport. So does not take away the meaning, but expands on the meaning. So the last line where he says that one sticking to Krishna consciousness, one returns back home, back to Godhead, even in this life. There's no corresponding Sanskrit in the verse, but it said Labdha Smriti Ryatya Ati Param Advana. So Ati Param means basically back to Godhead, and Advana means commencing on that path. So this is essentially a summary verse that summarizes the teaching of Jat Bharat, and it brings forth the two very powerful aspects that Jat Bharat has spoken to the king about making spiritual advancements. So he speaks about asanga and sangha. He speaks about material detachment and spiritual attachment. So the asanga, the asanga says is achieved by cutting the binding knots with the sword of knowledge. So Gyan is therefore useful in the sense that it helps in developing detachment. So we often deprecate Gyan, saying that we don't want to be Gyanis, or Gyan Marg leads one to Brahman liberation, which is not desirable for devotees, and all that is correct. But Gyan is useful in two ways. One is that through the process of knowledge, one is able to disentangle themselves from the material world. And second is, through the process of knowledge, one is able to know what needs to be done to make spiritual advancement. Now, ultimately, it is the practice of devotional service that will take one back. But what to practice, what not to practice, who to take shelter of, when to do what, all this comes only by a careful study of the scriptures or by hearing from one who has done it. Right? So the asanga part is the detachment, and then of course sangha has been glorified over and over again by Jat Bharat, that by the association of exalted devotees, one can attain everything. So sangha is so powerful that it can even include the perfection of knowledge. So if one is able to get the right association fortuitously, then one can even attain the perfection of knowledge. But in most of the cases, there has to be some kind of discrimination that needs to be applied when seeking association. So when Parishit Maharaj was fasting on the banks of river Ganges, and then he asked this question of what is the duty of a man and what is the duty of a man who is about to die. There were many answers that were given. There were very advanced souls present there. But Parishit Maharaj had that discrimination to not be fully satisfied with the answers, which is why he waited for Sukadev Goswami to come. He put the question again, and thus the Bhagavatam was spoken. So, Sangha, unless it is coming through an overabundance of mercy, is also predicated on knowing. So we see in Nectar of Instruction, it opens up with the 6 Vegams, Vacho Vegam, Manasukruta Vegam. And then the verse ends with saying that a person who has qualified this is now ready to be the spiritual master of the world. Now, obviously, this is not meant for the person who is reading the book, because Prabhupada said the Nectar of Instruction it's not even for the beginning devotees. It is for the people who are thinking of becoming devotees. It is also for devotees who are practicing, but he made this distinction between Nectar of Instruction and Nectar of Devotion. And he said that Nectar of Devotion is a book of spirituality for practicing devotees. And Nectar of Instruction is a book of morality for those who want to be devotees. So when somebody is wanting to be a devotee, the first thing is to know who to take shelter of. And that is why the nectar of instruction starts with the 6 qualities of a guru. And when you see this person, then you take shelter of that person. So that knowledge is first given, so that the sangha that the person takes is conducive to them progressing in the correct direction. So Prabhupada says in the purport that to become liberated from material bondage, one must give up the association of worldly people and accept the association of devotees. Positive and negative processes are mentioned in this regard. Through the association of devotees, one develops Krishna consciousness, which is dormant within. The Krishna consciousness movement is giving this chance to everyone. We are giving shelter to everyone who is serious about progressing in Krishna consciousness. We arrange for the lodging and board so that they can peacefully cultivate Krishna consciousness and return home back to Godhead, even in this life. So this ends the chapter. We'll quickly go over or before I go over the contents, there was a question asked by Nandagopal Prabhu about how do we consider the atoms to be coming from Maya. So I had said that I'll reflect a little bit on it. So wanted to just give an answer. It maybe not the only answer. So the question was that Jad Bharat is making this proposition that it is incorrect to assume that the items that you are seeing around exist by themselves. And he says everything that you see around you is made of earth. So the items are not existing, earth is existing. And then he says, but the earth itself is composed of atoms. So it's not the earth existing, but the atoms existing. And then he says that the atoms are coming from Maya. Right? And the question was that the material world is said to be real, but temporary. Right? So there are 2 aspects to address this. One is that in the 3rd canto of the Bhagavatam, when we were reading the process of Sarga, then it is explained over there that this material world is created as a result of the glance of Mahavishnu on Durga Devi. Right? The glance is considered to be Shambhu, Lord Shiva, and Durga Devi is the personification of Maya. The glance carries the jivas, and Maya carries pradhan. And by the agitation of the jivas and the desires, the pradhan successively differentiates until it finally becomes what we see in the material world. So if we trace that line back, then the material world is essentially a product of Maya. Right? So the point that is being made is by tattva, it is correct. Now, from an experiential perspective, even though the statement that material elements are eternal but temporary, Jad Bharat's statement is referring to the illusory aspect of considering the material world to be permanent. So when one considers that this world that we are living in is all in all, it is eternal, permanent, that's an illusion. So from an experiential perspective, one can also make the statement that the permanency of the material world is illusion. So saying that the material world rests on illusion, and this is a statement that is found at several places in the scripture, that the material world rests on illusion, is speaking more about the relationship of the material world with one who is perceiving it in that way. Right? So these were the 2 points that came to my mind. Let me go over the flow of the chapter, and then we'll pause for any discussion. So the chapter began with inquiries by the king to Jadbharat. Jadbharat then speaks about the falsity of the material world. He then speaks about the truth, the satyam of the spiritual world. And essentially he speaks about the Lord, he speaks about the Lord's abode, and he speaks about Bhakti, all of them being eternal. And the chapter concluded, the chapter is only 16 verses, small chapter. The chapter concluded with Jadbharat talking about his own history to instill faith in the king, and also to impart the lessons that were learned, which is the importance of seeking devotee association and the importance for developing material renunciation. So this theme will carry on in the next chapter, the theme of renunciation, not so much of association, because he spoke quite extensively about the importance of Sangha. So in the next chapter, the next 2 chapters are companion chapters. He will give an allegory, very much like the Puranjan allegory, about the forest of material desires, right? And then he speaks about material association. And the chapter after that, which concludes this pastime, is an explanation of that allegory. Okay, so let me pause here and see if you have any discussion.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. In one of the verses, it said that to get the mercy of the devotees, bathing in the dust of the devotees. I think it was verse. Yeah, but no, what I wanted to say is it's not easy to get the dust of the devotees. I think you mentioned it's also the instruction of the devotees, or
So you're right, Prabhu. Getting the association of a devotee it's difficult, because the association of a devotee is as good as going back to Godhead, and going back to Godhead is difficult. So we know that and we can see that in our own lives, that at some point we got the mercy of a devotee in some way. Either we got a book, or somebody preached to us, or befriended us, and that essentially it's a start, but it's something that has an inevitable conclusion that ultimately takes us back to Godhead. So it is potent. How we get the association of devotee? That is only by good fortune. There's no real qualification, not through. Vishnu Chakravarti basically mentions a lot of things that do not matter, that not through study of the scriptures, not through charity, not through this, not through that. And this chapter also, Jadbharat makes this point, not through this, not through this. So basically negates almost everything that is considered to be piety. That one can get Vaishnava Sangha. How does one get Vaishnava Sangha? Simply by good fortune. It's the good fortune equates to mercy of the devotee. That it is ahituki, that there is no qualification that one has to get the mercy, but the devotee gives it. The devotee mercifully gives it.
it's like bhakti, somehow or other, somehow get bhakti. That means bhakta giving bhakti.
Yeah. Same thing, it's synonymous because Vaishnav Sangha and Bhakti, because what does the devotee give in association? He gives Bhakti. And he gives instructions, he gives encouragement, but essentially all of it is geared towards the cultivation of Bhakti. So yeah, you're right.
Thank you. Thank you, Bhava.
Thank you. Okay, so if there are no more questions, let us proceed to the 13th chapter, which is titled as Further Talks Between King Rahugan and Jat Bharat. So the chapter has 26 verses, and the first 19 verses is this allegorical story by Jat Bharat, and the last 7 verses is based on the allegory. Jat Bharat gives specific instructions to the king. And so this part is important because you can speak all the philosophy you want, but ultimately the disciple needs to be told, do this, don't do this. So we see Jat Bharat giving specific instructions to the king, and the king responding by his expression of gratitude. Okay, so one thing that we will notice here is that the way the chapter has been structured is that Jat Bharat does not explain the allegory. So he gives the allegory, he gives the instruction with the understanding that the king has already grasped the essence of the allegory. A little different from the Puranjan, where Narad Muni, after giving the allegory of Puranjan, in a few verses, we expand it, but in a few verses, he explains the allegory. And that's because that allegory is also very elaborate. This allegory is just 19 chapters. But in the next chapter, Parikshit Maharaj will ask Sukdev Goswami, can you explain this allegory? And the next chapter, which is a fairly long chapter, I believe 41, 42 verses, Sukadev Goswami then explains the allegory. And what we'll see is that the allegory essentially gets explained twice. So as we read the chapter, we'll see that in the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains the allegory. So he gives us a sneak preview into the 14th chapter. And so he explains what the allegory means. And of course, in the next chapter, he re-explains what the allegory means as Sukdev Goswami explains it. Both these chapters, the purports are primarily preaching purports, because the allegory is mostly about being too invested in the material conception. So philosophically, the points are rather straightforward. So Srila Prabhupada takes this opportunity to strongly teach. And this is one of the areas where he comes down heavily on Grahastha life, comes down heavily on the current state of the society, on Kali Yuga, etc. So we'll witness a fair amount of strong and direct preaching in this chapter by Srila Prabhupada. Okay, starting with verse 1. Brahman vacha duratyaye dhvanya jaya niveshito rajastama sattva vivekta karma drak saesha sarto artha para paribrahman Bhavatamim yatina sarma vindati.
Jat Bharat, who had fully realized Brahman, continued, my dear Raghuvana, the living entity wanders on the path of material world, which is very difficult for him to traverse, and he accepts repeated birth and death, being captivated by the material world under the influence of the three modes of material nature, Sattvagun, Rajagun, and Tamagun. The living entity can see only the three fruits of activities under the spell of material nature. These fruits are auspicious, inauspicious, and mixed. He thus becomes attached to religious, economic development, sense gratification, and the monistic theory of liberation, merging with the Supreme. He works very hard day and night, exactly like a merchant who enters a forest to acquire some article to sell later for profit. However, he cannot really achieve happiness within this material world.
So, if you remember in the last verse of the 12th chapter, the previous chapter, Jat Bharat had stressed upon the importance of crossing over material existence. Right? He has spoken about material attachment and spiritual attachment. This chapter will now talk about the so it does not really talk about how to develop material detachment, but it tries to implicitly develop detachment by highlighting the dangers of material attachment. So the chapter is what I would consider to be a sobering chapter, because material life is very, very soundly condemned, especially household life, very, very harshly condemned. Right? We see don't see this mood very often in the Bhagavatam. We see this in the instruction of the Lord Kapila, where he condemns material life and grasta life. We see that in the Puranjan pastime, and we see this here. Also, there are places in the Bhagavatam where the householder life is glorified. Does anybody remember what are the places? So one place where material life is glorified is in the conversation between Kardama Muni and Devahuti. Another place is in the conversation between Kashyap Rishi and Diti. And the third place is in the subtext, in the conversation between Puranjan and his wife Puranjani, where there's a glorification of material life. So we see both. It's balanced, and the point, of course, is that a household life that is lived for material enjoyment is condemned, and the household life that is lived for spiritual advancement is glorified. So Prabhupada says that that one will be forced to accept a certain type of body, and protesting will not help. That is the stringent law of nature, due to the entity's ignorance. And so, so Jat Bharat here talks about that the living entity wanders on the path of the material world, which is very difficult to traverse, and accepts repeated birth and death. So Prabhupada says that there's no choice in this. One may get the body of an animal or something else based on one's karma. There's no negotiations on that point. And what is the nature of karma? That is described in the rest of the verse. That the three modes of the material nature, they create three kinds of fruits: desirable, undesirable, and mixed. So this desirable is the immediate sense gratification that one gets. Undesirable is the suffering that one gets. And mixed is the suffering that feels like pleasure and the pleasure that feels like suffering. And because of that, the chaturarthas, dharma, artha, kam, and moksha becomes the object of attachment. So the person becomes addicted to working very hard day and night, exactly like a merchant who enters a forest to acquire some articles to sell later for profit. So this is essentially the heading of the allegory. The allegory describes the experiences of a merchant who has entered a forest to acquire some articles for profit. And what does the merchant experience? What is the results of that experience? That is explained in this allegory. Okay. Let's move on to the next verse. Yasyam memeshan naradeva dasvaha sartham vilumpanti punayakam bala bhumaya yatra haranti sarthikam pramattama vishya pramatama vishya yathoranam brakaha.
O King Rahugana, in this forest of material existence, there are 6 very powerful plunderers. When the conditioned soul enters the forest to acquire some material gain, the 6 plunderers misguide him. Thus, the conditioned merchant does not know how to spend his money, and it is taken away by these plunderers, like tigers, jackal, and other ferocious animals in a forest that are ready to take away a lamb from the custody of its protector. The wife and children enter the heart of the merchant and plunder him in so many ways.
So as I mentioned, these allegories are fairly straightforward, and we'll see that they fall in 2 categories. One is allegorical, where there's mention of that the merchant gets trapped by creepers and bitten by insects. So there is some amount of metaphors that are being applied. The creepers are compared to be the arms of his wife that wraps around him. And in other cases, like in this verse, that Bhaya speaks pretty in a straightforward way. So we see a mix of that. He says there are 6 plunderers that misguide him, right? So the plunderers are the senses, and then there are tigers, jackals, and ferocious animals. So they are again metaphors for something. And then he says that the wife and the children enter the heart of the merchant. So this is not metaphor anymore. So this is him literally saying that when a person is involved in the material journey, then this is what happens. So the wife and the child enter the heart. So what I will also share with you is a table that gives all the allegories and the explanation. So it's a combination of 13 and 14 chapter. Essentially, I have lifted it from Bhagavad Subodhini. Devotees there have done an excellent job preparing this table that talks about the allegory and the comparison, and it also gives the source and the destination verse. So it's a quick guide to the symbolism in the allegory. But again, as I mentioned, the allegories are very straightforward. So Srila Prabhupada uses this as his purports are relatively on the longer side, medium long, I say medium and long, because he used this as an opportunity to preach. So we begin with this allegory of the merchant entering the forest and his experiences over there. Right now, the first understanding, of course, is that the merchant represents the conditioned living entity, and this forest represents the material world. So the allegory is speaking about the experience of a conditioned jiva in the material world. So what is the first thing that attracts them? The six plunderers, which is the six senses, the sixth being the mind, which steal from the merchant who is misguided. And Vishnu Chakravarti says that he is misguided because of bad advice from so-called gurus. Right? The Kunayakam, the bad chariot driver, is the misguided intelligence of the person. Then wife and sons are like jackals, and they plunder the merchant who is pramattam. Pramattam means who is inattentive to spiritual goals. So, in the way that this verse is written, there is an active verse and a passive verse. So, the active verb and a passive verb. So, the active verb indicates the doer, and the passive means that on which something is done. So, the way the verse is written is that the wife and the children are actually the passive doers. The active doer is the merchant. So the point that is made is that it is not the wife and the children who plunder the merchant, but it is the inattentiveness of the merchant that creates a situation by which he gets plundered by the wife and the children. Inattentiveness means that inattentiveness to spiritual life. So when the conditioned jiva is inattentive to the spiritual life, he creates an environment around him which encourages this kind of a behavior. Right? So the culpability is actually established on the merchant. Overall, this cautioning about family life, as I mentioned, is one of the recurring themes that appears in the Bhagavatam. Mentioned Lord Kapila speaks in the 30th chapter, the 3rd canto, about the dangers of family life. In the prayers by Lord Brahma, interestingly, he's praying to Lord Vishnu, and then he interrupts the glorification of the Lord to criticize the family life. And then he returns to his glorification. Srila Prabhupada in the purport notes that unless one is a good politician, he cannot enjoy family life. So the family life is described as too sweet to resist and too hot to eat. So it has this characteristic of desirability and undesirability. There's a saying, at least in colloquial Hindi, that marriage is like Dilli ka laddu. That one who eats will repent and one who does not eat will repent. So one who does not eat repents because the laddu is very sweet and delectable, and one who eats repents because he gets indigestion. They're considered to be very, 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 very rich. Like another analogy is that it's like a rat trap with cheese inside it. That the cheese is desirable, but when one goes inside, then one does not come out. So Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport that the aim of life is Vishnu. Nate vidu swartha gatim hi Vishnu. Everyone works very hard to earn money, but no one knows that his real self-interest is serving the Supreme Lord. Instead of spending money for advancing the Krishna conscious movement, one spends his hard-earned money on clubs, brothels, liquor, slaughterhouse, and so forth. So we see this very strong preaching for that. Now one might say that there is something in between also. Like he said that either in the purport is saying you're either spending money to advancing Krishna consciousness, or you're spending money on clubs and brothels and liquor and slaughterhouses. And one might say that, well, I don't spend money over there, but I spend money. I don't spend money in Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada says there's no really middle ground there. You either spend money on spirituality, or your money directly or indirectly implicates you in this. And so he says, due to the sinful activities, one never attains happiness. Okay. Verse 3. Prabhu Taviro Tranagulma Gavre Kathor Damsher Mashake Rupadrutaha Kvachit Tu Gandharvapuram Prapashyati Kvachit Chashurayol Mukhagraham.
In this forest, there are dense bowers composed of thicket of bushes, grass, and creepers. In these bowers, the conditioned soul is always disturbed by cruelty, by cruelly biting mosquitoes, envious people in common. Sometimes he sees an imaginary palace in the forest, and sometimes he is bewildered by seeing a fleeting field of ghosts, which appear like a meteor in the sky.
So in his house, so this composition of bushes, grass, and creepers, these are essentially representing material activities. So the jiva in this material world, he performs an abundance of material actions. And while he's performing them, he is disturbed by mosquitoes. So when he goes into the shrubs, the mosquitoes bites him. So when he's performing these material activities, there are evil men who disturb. The mosquitoes are representing evil men. The body and the house are temporary, like the city and in the sky. So this is Gandharvapuri. Gandharvapuri is an imaginary city of unlimited opulence in the sky. So while this person is performing this overabundance of material activities, while he is being attacked by other men, he sees this imaginary city of gold, and he considers it to be real and permanent. Prapashyati considers it to be the goal of him traveling through this dense forest while being attacked. Sometimes he sees pishachas who take the form of firebrands and move quickly in the sky. So the pishachas are compared to gold, and they're ephemeral. So in the sense, the pishachas, they're scary, but they come and then they go. So the person, he also runs after the gold, considering them to be valuable. So in the Bhagavad Gita, we see that the underlying mood of the instructions by Krishna is that you do your duty while remembering me. And he concludes with saying that Krishna Man Manaba Bhakto Madhyaji Mata Maskaru, that think of me at all the time. But the accompaniment is think of me while doing your duty. Srimad Bhagavatam is different. It is spoken to a person who has already been purified by the execution of the duty and who has already renounced it. That's the difference between Arjuna and Parikshit Maharaj. That Arjuna is standing at the cusp of the battle. Parikshit Maharaj has been cursed to die. Like Arjuna is fighting for his right to rule. Parikshit Maharaj has already relinquished his kingdom. So Jiva Goswami in Tattva Sandarbha, he comments on this, saying that in the Bhagavatam, Sukadeva Goswami, he does not dilute Bhagavad Dharma in favor of other dharmas. Now Krishna does say Sarvadam Pratyaje, but his which is considered to be the segue into the Bhagavatam, but the stream of instruction in the Gita are perform a prescribed duty while thinking of me. But Sukadeva Goswami, he does not have to worry about Parikshit Maharaj being misled about his responsibilities. Right? Parikshit Maharaj has already transcended that. He was a king, he ruled successfully, he's already given the kingdom to his son, that's taken care of. So he does not mix Bhagavad Dharma with Varnashram Dharma. He does not mix Bhagavad Dharma with the Dharma of karma. He just speaks unvarnished and undiluted Bhagavad Dharma. That is why there is a very strong underlying mood of detachment in the Bhagavatam, because it's being spoken to a person facing imminent death. So both Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam speak about detachment. But this is where the nuances of preaching are important. Right? In the Bhagavad Gita, the flavor of detachment is different. Detachment in Bhagavad Gita is developed through the performance of one's prescribed duty. So detachment is used as a way to further execute your prescribed duty. In Srimad Bhagavatam, detachment is very strongly and directly preached by virtue of condemning the object of attraction. Right? So this does not mean that Bhagavatam is not meant for everyone, or that Bhagavad Dharma is not meant for everyone. However, people in different ashrams need to understand the spirit of it and apply. So one can read the Bhagavad Gita and apply it in one's life. One can read the Bhagavatam and establish that as their goals. And one can read the Bhagavatam and start following the Bhagavad Dharma of spiritual attachment. Because while speaking about material detachment, the Bhagavatam strongly speaks about how to develop attraction for the Supreme Lord. Yes, which is why the Bhagavatam is also meant for everyone. So back to the allegory. So here the people, the plunderers and the thieves are considered to be the people who are the closest to you. So one is most anxious about those that are close to oneself. Right? So if something happens within the family, then one is very anxious about it. If something is happening even right next to you, Like if there is a family and the son is across the world in a different country, and then he calls back and he says, I'm sick, there's tremendous anxiety in the parents. But the person living right next to them may be suffering a lot more. But there is much less anxiety. Why? Because of the proximity of relationship. So how can one not succumb to this, become paranoid? By developing the mood of service. So the mood of service has the potency of transforming the most dangerous situation into the most pleasing situation. So when one looks at the people around, then one does not look upon them as objects of exploitation or exploiters, but one looks upon them as partners in serving Krishna. So whether the person is close or far, they all become connected in terms of their relationship to Krishna. So why does this become a pleasing situation? Because even if one is being exploited, then one does not become bewildered, because that connection to Krishna is there. So when, again, back to Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna asked Krishna about the difference between sannyas and tyag, and Krishna says they are the same, but the difference is that sannyas is giving up activities and tyag is giving up the fruits of the activity. So sannyas is meant for renunciants and tyag is meant for grahasthas. Right? So the point that he makes is that even though the external manifestation may be different, the sannyasis, they renounce activities, karma tyag. And the grahasthas, they don't renounce activities, they do karma phal tyag. They renounce the fruit of the activity. So renunciation is a state of mind. It is not based on external acceptance or rejection, which is why Krishna says that they are the same. Narad Muni also notes in 714 Bhagavatam that the grahasthas need to be internally detached and they need to be externally attached. It's an interesting point that he makes. Prabhupada also makes this point in the previous verse. Grahasthas need to be good politicians. And here he uses politicians in a more positive way, that a politician will feel something and say something else. So they feel internal detachment, but externally they're attached. If the grahastha begins to act externally detached, then he will have problem with wife and spouse and children and others. So married life will become very difficult to live. But internal detachment is important. The Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport that in these dealings, one has to meet many undesirable people, the mosquitoes. And the behavior is compared to the biting of mosquitoes. This creates very undesirable conditions. Even in the midst of these disturbances, one imagines that he's going to construct a grand house and live there permanently. Right? So this is the house in the sky, the Gandharva. Although he knows that he cannot. Gold is compared to the quickly fleeting feed. This is the Pishach, which appears like a meteor in the sky. It displays itself for a moment and then is gone. Right? This is the nature of money. You get some and you lose some. And generally, karmis are attracted to gold or money, but here they are compared to ghosts and witches. Okay, we'll do a couple of more verses and then we'll stop for discussion. Nivasato yadravenatma buddhe tatastato dhavati bhotvayam kvachik cha vyatoti tapam sudumra Disho na janati rajasvalakshaha.
My dear king, the merchant on the forests of a material world, his intelligence victimized by home, wealth, relative, and so forth, run from one place to another in search of success. Sometimes his eyes are covered by the dust of the whirlwind. That is to say, in his lust, he is captivated by the beauty of his wife, especially during her menstrual period. Thus, his eyes are blinded and he cannot see where to go and what he is doing.
So, so in close conjunction with one's material desires is one's desire for sex, right? So, uh, uh, once the person is developing this conception that the house and the wealth is mine, then then he runs here and there. So he runs here and there to basically now look for sex enjoyment. So he becomes covered with the impulse of lust with woman. So this is compared with the allegory that is used here is that it's like the dirt that is raised by the whirlwind. That the eyes get blinded by the dirt and it does not know what is where. So the dirt is like lust. And the nature of whirlwind is that it is very encompassing. So when the dust is in the eyes, the person does not know, Vishwanath Chakravarti says, he does not know which direction the devas are, which means he is not able to discriminate between good and bad. So Prabhupada writes in the purport that he explains that why is the person captivated by the beauty of the wife, especially during the menstrual period? And Prabhupada explains that, and so this is where there is a semblance of Vedic, now that is not there, that those who follow some form of the Vedic injunctions, they accept this fact that one can only have sex for the purpose of procreation, which means that they also do not use contraceptives or artificial means to stop conception. So the companion challenge with this is that if one only has sex for the sake of conception, then there may be too many children in the house. The wife will not like the fact that she is always pregnant. So then what does the grahastha do? That they wait for the wife to be in the menstrual period, because they know that after the menstrual period finishes, the wife or the woman cannot conceive for the next 3 to 5 days. So that is why the wife looks especially attractive during that time, because the husband is now anticipating this sexual union. So in a way, it is tricking because externally it is following the scriptures. The person is having a relationship without any contraception, etc. But it's also tricking the scriptures, because the understanding is that the wife cannot conceive at the time. So Prabhupada says, therefore karmis are attracted to women as friends or wives. Indeed, they cannot work without sex. Under the circumstances, this wife is compared to a whirlwind. So whirlwind, they're synonymous. I said lust. Vishwanath Chakravarti talks about whirlwind as lust, and Prabhupada compares it to wife, essentially representing lust. So the whirlwind is compared to the wife, especially during a menstrual period. Those who strictly follow the rules and regulation of household life engage sex only one at the end of the menstrual period. As one looks forward to this opportunity, his eyes are overwhelmed with the beauty of his wife. Thus, it is said that the whirlwind covers the eyes with dust. Such a lusty person does not know that all his material activities are being observed by different demigods. And so, this is Prabhupada expanding a little bit upon what Vishnu Chakravarti says, that when the eyes are blinded with lust, the person does not know which are the direction where the devas are. So, the point that is being made that it is impossible to fool the devas because they are everywhere. All the activities that we are being done is constantly being observed by the devas. So it is said that the different demigods, they witness different kinds of actions. The sun, the wind, Lord Yamraj. So it is impossible for one to fool the devas. So even though the person is using this clever tactics, but in this he forgets that the devas are witnessing all the actions. Okay, we'll do one. Let's do one more verse. Adrashtajali swanakarna shula ulukavagvivyatitantaratma apunyavrakshan shayate kshudradito marichato yanya abhidhavati kvachit.
Wandering in the forests of the material world, the conditioned soul sometimes hears an invisible cricket making harsh sound, and his ears become very much aggrieved. Sometimes his heart is pained by the sound of an owl, which are just like the harsh word of his enemies. Sometimes he takes shelter of a tree that has no fruits or flowers. He approached such a tree due to his strong appetite, and thus he suffers. He would like to acquire water, but he is simply illusioned by mirage, and he runs after it.
So this verse is pretty loaded. There are about 5 or 6 metaphors used in this verse. So the ears are pierced by the sharp language of people. So this is the these are like owls. So owls come out at night, and I don't hear many owls here, but in India it's not very uncommon. At least in the house where I lived, the owls would be hooting all through the night. You couldn't really see them because firstly it is night and secondly they're camouflaged. But they would make this. It's not an unpleasing sound because they just keep making that hooting sound over and over again. So this is like criticism that is coming. So you may or may not know the people who are coming. It may be explicit or implicit, but nevertheless, it afflicts the person. And what does the person do? He goes to sinful people. So sinful people are compared to impious trees. So when one goes to a tree and to look for fruits or flowers, but if a tree is barren, it does not give either. So similarly, when one goes to impious people, then one may beg, but because they have nothing to give, there is no advantage of approaching them. So begging from uncharitable people is like a mirage in the water. One thinks that they will go and get something, but actually they get nothing. So Prabhupada says, even within one's inner circle, there is much backbiting. And this is compared to the sound vibration of a cricket in the forest. One cannot see the cricket, but one hears its sound and thus becomes aggrieved. Prabhupada calls it cricket, and Vishnu Chakravarti compares it to owl. When one takes to Krishna consciousness, one always hears unpalatable words from relatives. That is the nature of the world. One cannot avoid mental distress due to the backbiting of envious people. Being very much aggrieved, sometimes one goes to a sinful person for help. So this is the trees without flowers and fruits. But he has no means to help because he has no intelligence. So the tree has nothing to give. So the living entity is disappointed. This is like running after a mirage in the desert in an effort to find water. So in terms of the mirage in the desert, and it's kind of interesting that one of the most powerful statements I heard was actually in an American movie, English movie. I think the name is American President. And so it's the conversation between the president and his political strategist. So the president has some kind of morals. The strategist is a guy, basically a guy without much morals. So in the conversation, he says that the strategist is saying that you say this, you say that as part of your campaign, and you will get votes. So then the president, he objects. He says that I am just creating mirages for them in the desert, and this is not fair to them. And then the strategist, he says that people need these mirages. They run after the mirages to drink the water. And when they find that there is no water, they are so thirsty that they will drink the sand. But they need it. So this was a statement on which I felt it was a statement, even though it's in a very material setting, but it is a statement that describes the material conditioning, that people are so strongly vested in material enjoyment that when they run after the mirage, even if there is no water, they will drink the sand. Right? So the metaphor was that even if they don't get what they think they will get, they will be desperately happy to enjoy whatever they got in return. The one runs after wealth thinking they will get happiness and contentment. And when the person gets wealth, they don't get happiness and contentment, but then they will enjoy the suffering that one gets from the wealth. And Prabhupada says such activities do not produce any tangible results due to being directed by the illusory energy. The conditioned soul suffers in so many births, so many ways. Okay, so let me pause over here and see if there is any comments or discussion.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Well, one thing I was thinking like about internally detached and externally attached position of a householder. When it is done in a spiritual, devotional way, then it is not negative, isn't it? It's negative when it is done in a impersonal way of detachment, external attachment. Then it becomes really hypocrisy. Whereas when we are attached to Krishna, and then in that attachment we are detached to the family members, but at the same time externally attached because of service and I don't know I'm putting it right, but I'm thinking that it's not a hypocrisy. That's what I'm thinking, but can you please throw some light on that? Whether I'm on the right track?
So not only is it not hypocrisy, it is also something that is recommended. Right? Narad Muni recommends this. The Prabhupada recommends this on the strength of Narad Muni that for a grahastha to be successful, and obviously success in the Bhagavatam does not mean a successful grahastha, but a successful spiritualist, one needs to develop these dual qualities of external attachment and internal, appearing to be externally attached while cultivating internal detachment. Because the external attachment is important to maintain a modicum of tranquility in the life of the Grahastha. The Grahastha ashram by nature is one of attachment. One needs to be attached to the wife and children, one needs to be attached to the house, to the job, one needs to be attached to wealth. So it's basically an ashram for attachment. So if one is practicing excessive attachment in the Grahastha life, the person is simply creating confusion for himself and others. Better to leave the Grahastha life and move to another ashram. But while he's practicing Grahastha life, then one needs to demonstrate this attachment. But then how to protect from the debilitating effect of attachment? The protection comes from internal detachment. And this is demonstrated by the Raja Rishis. Right? We see that in case of Arjun. Arjun, the battle, externally attached. Attached to protecting his life. He didn't say, okay, now, anybody can kill me. What does it matter? I'm not the body. He's attached to his son. Abhimanyu dies. He gets very angry. But he never gets bewildered. Right? He's always fixed in his service. Same thing demonstrated by Parashar Maharaj. The Acharyas note that when he found out that he was cursed to die in 7 days, he did not immediately leave the palace. What does he do? He crowns his son as the emperor. That's the sign of attachment. Not necessarily to the son, but at least to the kingdom. And if he was truly detached, then he would say, I don't care about all this. This kingdom is material, my son is material, and let me quickly, without wasting time, go. But no. He does the Abhishek for his son, not the Abhishek, what do they call it? The coronation. He does the coronation for his son. He performs the necessary yajnas to relinquish his responsibilities. That is external attachment. But all the time he was doing it for the sake of maintaining propriety. As an emperor, these are my responsibilities. So it's a fine balance, but it's one that we begin to practice in our own lives, perhaps even without realizing it. Because there is so much of emphasis right from the second chapter. Krishna starts speaking about equanimity and detachment, samadrishti. It basically becomes a recurring theme. Bhagavatam, it is much more explicit. So whether we like it or not, we begin to practice it. These two things of detachment and attachment. In the early days of ISKCON, there were many Grahastha lives that were destroyed, the household life, because the people did not understand the balance between the two. They started mistreating their wives, or they started neglecting the children, the families fell apart. They still hadn't developed enough detachment, but then they started holding themselves responsible. But as the movement is matured, I think the devotees also are becoming more mature in their practice.
I'm getting a phone call, Prabhu. I'll come back and ask you another one if time permits.
Okay, I think we are a little over time, so maybe we can take it next time. If anybody has any other questions, comments?
I just wanted to add, Prabhu, is also to set example, because even if Parikshit Maharaj cannot just leave everything and go, and he has to set good example for the future, even for parent, and even though we are trying to set example in a way, but sometimes we're not successful, but at least we are trying.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Krishna says that even if one has internal attachment, still continue to perform your duty to set an example for others. Right. So this is one of the responsibilities for the Grahastha life, that your real responsibility is to guide them to Krishna, But while you meet them at where they are, right? You can't just go and say that leave everything and take to Krishna. The magic is in meeting them. That's what Krishna is doing with us. He's meeting us where we are and then taking us. That's where there is the magic in Grahastha life. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so we'll stop here. Thank you. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhubhyeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय, शिला प्रभुपाद की जय, थाई गौर प्रेमानंद, हरे कृष्ण। थैंक यू।